Hello, my name is Jeremy, and this is the True Crime Chronicles channel. This aged lady may appear as a gentle, benevolent grandma, yet she embodies the evidence that evil knows no age limit. Had it not been for the emergency service recording capturing the victim's excruciating last moments, she could have eluded punishment for her atrocious act. On May 18, 2012, at 5 p.m., Max Dashevsky received an alarming call from his close friend Jonathan Hoffman. Both young men were seniors at Farmington Central High School in the affluent West Bloomfield area, near Detroit, Michigan. Their friendship began in 9th grade during an English class, sparked by a question about their mutual appreciation for Tupac, one of the most pivotal and influential figures in the history of American hip-hop. Jonathan revealed to Max that he had recently failed a drug screening mandated by the court. He had been on probation since authorities discovered a prohibited synthetic substance in his vehicle 2 months earlier. The high schooler expressed concern over his grandmother, Sandra's, intense anger towards him. 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman had been residing in his grandparents' apartment for 9 months following his parents' divorce and their relocation to Arizona. Initially, he went with them, but shortly after their arrival, the family received a severe setback when his younger sister, Jessica, was found to have a benign brain tumor, necessitating multiple surgeries and ongoing medical care. Adapting to a new school and coping with his sister's health issues left the teenager feeling unhappy and despondent. Jonathan was overjoyed when his grandmother, Sandra, proposed that he come back to West Bloomfield and stay with her until he completed his final year of high school. The boy was ecstatic to reunite with his friends and the comfortable environment of Farmington. Nonetheless, not everyone approved of the living arrangement between Jonathan and his grandmother. Jonathan's father, Michael, a prominent attorney for many years, had observed some disconcerting traits in his mother-in-law's personality. 74-year-old Sandra Layne, a retired educator and mother of 5, could be exacting and quite stern with others, but she, along with her 85-year-old husband, Fred, cherished their grandson deeply. Given the high schooler's yearning to reunite with his friends, his father eventually consented. Thus, Jonathan found himself thriving once again at Farmington High School, where he was recognized as the class clown. As an exceptionally intelligent student and a whiz in technology, he had secured a full scholarship to Eastern Michigan University. His peers saw him as a spirited, cheerful, and optimistic individual. That's why the call Jonathan made to Max stirred an unaccountable sense of alarm. He didn't seem like his usual self. In his tone was not only concern but palpable fear. The buddies decided to catch up later that same day. Jonathan assured his friend he would text him within the next 30 minutes to set the time. Max anticipated the message, but 40 minutes ticked by with no update from his friend. Growing impatient, the young man took the initiative to call Hoffman's number directly. The phone rang repeatedly, without a response. Unbeknownst to him at the time, Jonathan would never be able to reply to him again. Just before this incident, at 5:20 p.m., the West Bloomfield Township Police Department received an emergency call from the residence of Sandra Layne, Jonathan's grandmother. The young caller informed the dispatcher that he had been shot. Over the course of 3 minutes, he struggled to breathe and pleaded for assistance, stating that he was on the brink of death. The assailant had left the scene, evidently not in search of aid. The events that unfolded afterwards were even more horrific. The emergency service dispatcher listened as Jonathan frantically called out for someone to save him, followed by the sound of several gunshots. The young man screamed from the pain and then faintly said he was dying. There was a short silence. Then a woman's scream echoed, leading to a chilling quietude. By around 5:30 p.m., West Bloomfield police arrived at the neatly kept lawn of a condo within the serene, gated Maple Pleaseville community. A resident had alerted them to gunshots heard in this wealthy area. Predominantly inhabited by retirees and known for its low crime rate, especially in terms of violent offenses. As the officers disembarked from their vehicle, another gunshot rang out from within the residence. Before they could make their way inside, a woman emerged at the front door, complying with the officers' orders to disarm. A small, elderly woman with dimming red hair, wearing blood-spattered attire, stepped through the entrance, her hands raised in a halt, and informed the officers she had just taken her grandson's life. This revelation stunned the officers, yet it paled in comparison to what awaited them inside the condo. As they entered the premises, The officers were met with a ghastly tableau. Blood and smudges marked nearly every room. Bullet impacts marred the walls and furnishings, and empty shell casings were strewn across the ground. A 9mm Glock 17 semi-automatic handgun was found discarded near the entryway. Subsequent forensic analysis would reveal additional magazines for the firearm hidden within the residence. On the upper floor, police discovered 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman. He was sprawled face down in a crimson pool, suffering from numerous gunshot wounds across his chest, arms, back, and stomach, indicating many shots were executed at close quarters. Emergency medical personnel swiftly transported him to Botsford Hospital, clinging to the hope of saving him. Yet by 6 p.m., the young man sorrowfully succumbed to his injuries. Sandra, too, was transported to the closest medical facility for precautionary measures. Medical professionals performed various examinations to confirm her well-being. The following day, Sandra Layne faced charges for the homicide of her grandson and was detained without the possibility of bail, leaving the determination of her guilt, whether for first or second-degree murder, in the hands of a jury. She professed her innocence throughout. The news of the incident plunged Jonathan's family, friends, and neighbors into profound sorrow and astonishment. They were all left pondering what could have possibly motivated Sandra to aim and discharge a firearm at her dearly loved minor grandson. The news of the tragic incident in the tranquil neighborhood spread swiftly, with the media speculating various theories. There were whispers that Jonathan had not passed a drug screening. Reporters zeroed in on a narrative of two neglectful parents who had left their substance-dependent teenage son in the custody of elderly caretakers. According to the grandmother's statement, at the time of his demise, Jonathan had an illegal synthetic drug in his system, which had previously caused complications for him. His passing was shadowed by another sensational incident involving hallucinogen consumption. Just 2 weeks prior, another youth, under the influence of drugs, was implicated in assaulting his family with a baseball bat, resulting in a deadly incident. Takir Cipriana and his accomplice had ingested a prohibited drug before the assault on their parents. Sandra Layne's attorney contended that she had legitimate concerns of facing a similar threat, fearing for her safety as she was tasked with managing a young man on probation and hard to restrain. It was widely reported that this drug could incite aggression in its users. If a situation akin to Takir Cipriana's had occurred at Sandra's residence, could that justify her actions against Jonathan? Claiming self-defense, this was the rationale Sandra provided to the police and later to the jury. She maintained that since Jonathan's return to West Bloomfield, he had become unruly, exhibited aggressive and provocative behavior, rarely left the home, and mingled with teens hooked on dangerous synthetic drugs. Sandra claimed that Jonathan's parents had not informed her of his addiction prior to his arrival, and during his stay, neither parent showed much concern for his activities. Sandra portrayed Michael, the father, as having abandoned the boy. Jonathan often had fits of rage, destroying objects, damaging furniture in his room, and smashing closet doors. If disputes arose or he was troubled, he would lash out, even breaking his own possessions like his computer, monitor, and phone. Jonathan was depicted as a youngster unable to manage his emotions, as described by Sandra Layne. Authorities verified that Jonathan had a history with illegal substances. On March 17, 2011, he was apprehended and penalized for carrying hallucinogenic drugs. Subsequently, in court, he was handed a 93-day deferred sentence, coupled with a year of probation and the requirement for random drug screenings related to these substances. Jonathan's acquaintances shared with law enforcement their worries about his drug habit and their efforts to steer him away from it. Sandra exerted her utmost effort to help Jonathan reform his ways, concentrate on his academic performance, and abide by her guidelines. Nonetheless, he resisted her attempts, proving to be defiant, erratic, and occasionally aggressive. Fred confirmed that from the moment Jonathan arrived, there were incessant, intense disputes between him and Sandra. She had even contacted the police on multiple occasions due to the high school student becoming utterly unmanageable, sought assistance from the school, but all efforts were fruitless. Sandra recounted an incident where Jonathan, under the influence of drugs, lost complete control, necessitating hospital staff to restrain him to a gurney. The elderly woman implored the teenager's parents for aid, yet his father remained indifferent and did not return to Michigan. Gradually, the grandmother grew to fear for her safety. She confided in her husband her fears regarding her grandson and his disreputable acquaintances. In a bid for self-protection and to safeguard her elderly husband, feeling cornered with no other option, Sandra acquired a Glock 17 pistol for defense in case Jonathan or his friends became aggressive. On the critical morning of May 18, 2012, Layne took the teenager for a drug test, which returned positive for illicit substances. Jonathan was instructed to undergo another test later that day. Upon another positive result, he became furious. While in his grandmother's vehicle, he resorted to swearing, violently kicking the dashboard, and at one point, seizing the steering wheel, compelling Sandra to halt the car multiple times. Jonathan even attempted to snatch the car keys at one juncture. Upon their return home, the confrontation intensified. Apprehensive he might be incarcerated, the high schooler decided to flee to Arizona immediately, demanding $2,000 and the car keys from his grandmother, but she complied with neither request. When Grandpa Fred took the dog for a walk, Sandra felt overwhelmingly frightened and attempted to pacify the teenager, to no avail. She retreated to her bedroom, retrieved the loaded pistol, hoping it would compel her grandson to heed her words, or at least acknowledge her presence. Upon returning upstairs to Jonathan's bedroom and finding him in the bathroom, instead of heeding her, the boy hurled insults, kicked her in the abdomen, and struck her on the head. A struggle ensued, during which Sandra discharged the firearm, then fled to the basement in a state of panic, seeking refuge. After a while, she ventured to check on him, only for the grandson to assault her once more, attempting to wrest the gun away. In the ensuing tussle, she shot again in self-defense. This narrative paints a picture of elderly individuals trapped in a dire predicament that tragically culminated in Sandra shooting her beloved grandson out of a genuine fear for her own life. However, the question remains, is the account as Layne portrayed it entirely accurate? As the investigation deepened, a starkly contrasting narrative began to surface, one that, while still tragic, was considerably more concerning. Initial claims by Sandra regarding Jonathan's alleged violent nature didn't align with the experiences of those who knew him personally. Contrary to portraying him as aggressive, interviews revealed that at school, Jonathan was known as a humorous and peace-loving individual, always quick to diffuse conflicts with his humor and intelligence. His friends, too, testified to not observing any recent changes in his demeanor. Furthermore, Jonathan was described as having a very lean build, standing at just 1.67 meters tall and weighing merely 50 kilograms. Hardly the profile of a physically intimidating person. His stature was notably similar to his grandmother's. It appeared that instances of Jonathan's so-called rage were exclusively reported by Sandra, a claim now met with skepticism. Fred, Sandra's husband, acknowledged witnessing heated arguments between his wife and grandson, but never any physical violence, despite being almost always present at home. He noted Sandra's active role in overseeing Jonathan's education, setting strict expectations that the teenager struggled to meet. Fred even suggested returning Jonathan to his parents in Arizona, a proposal Sandra rejected, contradicting her assertion that the boy was unmanageable under her care. Jennifer, Sandra's daughter, informed police that during the 9 months Jonathan stayed with his grandparents, he maintained daily communication with her and visited them monthly. Throughout this period, Sandra never conveyed any issues between her and Jonathan, nor did she express feeling overwhelmed by his presence. When Jennifer became aware of Jonathan's legal troubles related to illicit substances, she debated with her mother about the best course of action, suggesting either rehabilitation or returning him to Arizona. Sandra convinced her that she could manage the situation independently, leading Jennifer to reluctantly agree to leave her son in her parents' custody, a decision that would later prove to be tragically significant. Authorities were summoned to the Layne household on 2 occasions. The initial call occurred in March 2012 when Jonathan himself dialed emergency services, distressed after ingesting magic mushrooms and suffering from severe paranoia, fearing for his life. The police document notes that upon their arrival, the young man displayed no aggression, merely terror. Upon seeing the law enforcement officials, Jonathan eagerly embraced one, subsequently being secured to a stretcher for his protection and transported to a medical facility. A mere 4 days following the incident with the magic mushrooms, Sandra Layne reached out to 911, reporting that her grandson was enraged and attempting to flee, while Jonathan informed the dispatcher that his grandmother was forcibly trying to confine him in her vehicle. Upon the officer's arrival, they encountered Hoffman vocally berating his grandmother. the law enforcement officials proposed intervening with the irate youth, but Sandra chose to manage the matter personally. The episode was chronicled in the police documentation as a standard oral dispute between a guardian and a child, which was amicably settled. For the detectives leading the investigation, this case increasingly appeared less like an instance of a rebellious teenager spiraling out of control, and more like a situation where a domineering woman chose to enforce her authority over a defiant child. The hearing on April 12th concerning the possession of prohibited substances and the subsequent probation had evidently enraged Sandra. She was convinced she could discipline her grandson. Up to that point, the grandmother was resolute about redirecting Jonathan onto the correct path. However, as graduation drew near and her opportunities dwindled, this mission seemed more and more like a failure. In that instant, Sandra had numerous choices. She could have contacted her daughter or sent her grandson for rehabilitation. Instead, she acquired a semi-automatic pistol and underwent several shooting lessons at a firing range. Sandra was committed to prevailing in this conflict and asserting control over her unruly teenage grandson at any cost. 4 days after Jonathan was placed on probation, Sandra Layne applied for a license to possess and carry a firearm, and on April 18th, she purchased a 9mm Glock, explaining to the store owner that she required it for home protection. She opted for a weapon intended for lethal force, along with a box of ammunition containing expanding bullets, which are designed to inflict maximum damage on the target and are often used by hunters. Following the pistol purchase, Sandra took lessons at the nearest shooting range until she felt proficient in handling the firearm, all the while keeping her newfound expertise concealed from her husband, who remained unaware of the gun in the household. He was rather taken aback when he discovered how much his wife had accomplished covertly. On the fateful day of May 18, 2012, Sandra and Jonathan returned home around 5 p.m. Sandra requested her husband, Fred, to take their dog for a walk and insisted that he remain outside until she granted him permission to return. They spent such an extended time outdoors that both the homeowner and the dog grew weary. They sat together on the grass and watched a basketball game, as Fred Wayne, the grandfather of the deceased high schooler, recounted during an interview. When the sound of police sirens reached them, the man failed to grasp the situation. So, why did Sandra want Fred to depart from the residence? It appeared less like the action of a woman fearing for her life, and more like the behavior of an individual with a plan, evidently intending to carry it out without any interference or witnesses. If Jonathan had been in the agitated state described by the grandmother, it's improbable that Fred would have left them alone. However, the truly compelling evidence against Sandra was yet to emerge. At the same time that day, 5 p.m., Jonathan was conversing with his friend Max, confirming their evening arrangements. Max Dashevsky informed the police that Hoffman's tone did not convey anger or excitement. Instead, he seemed somewhat frightened. Jonathan was concerned about failing the drug test and apprehensive about his grandmother. He mentioned that Sandra was so enraged that she threatened to send him back to Arizona. Sandra claimed that her grandson violently assaulted her, striking her in the head and abdomen before she discharged the firearm. However, immediately after the incident, medical personnel from the nearest hospital examined her and found no injuries or bruises. Ballistics evidence revealed that Sandra discharged the firearm more than 10 times in various locations throughout the house, with 6 bullets striking Jonathan. 2 shots were aimed at his back, indicating that the young man was attempting to flee from Sandra. Another shot hit him in the abdomen while he was wounded and conversing with a 911 dispatcher. The police were convinced that it was Sandra pursuing Jonathan, not the other way around. The grandmother was seeking to punish her grandson for his wrongdoing, while the boy sought refuge. At some juncture, the woman descended to the basement to reload her pistol, likely when the teenager ascended to his bedroom to call 911. Subsequently, she returned and shot him at close range while he lay on the floor, bleeding, her own grandson. The toxicology report delivered the conclusive blow to Sandra's claims of self-defense. According to the report, at the time of the shooting, Jonathan's bloodstream did not contain any prohibited substances. Only a metabolite of a harmful drug was identified in his urine. The forensic examiner clarified that the residual traces discovered in the urine indicated that all substances had left the body and had no impact on Hoffman's behavior. In other words, Jonathan was entirely lucid when Sandra opened fire on him. Consequently, the jury dismissed the defendant's self-defense claim. On March 19, 2013, Sandra Layne was convicted of a serious crime against her grandson, Jonathan Hoffman. Prior to the sentencing, the elderly woman expressed regret for her actions, pleading for understanding that her intention had not been to take the teenager's life, but rather to help him resolve his issues together. Meanwhile, her daughter Jennifer urged for the harshest punishment for her mother, asserting that Sandra Layne was utterly malevolent and would undoubtedly repeat her actions if given the opportunity. She depicted her mother as a monstrous and obsessed individual fixated on academic achievement. Jennifer firmly believed that everything Layne had stated in her statement was a falsehood. She concluded by stating that her son now resided in heaven, a place that Sandra would never have access to. Layne was handed down a minimum sentence of 20 years, in addition to a mandatory 2-year term for utilizing a weapon in the commission of manslaughter. Her lawyer had pleaded on her behalf, citing concerns about her potential survival during an extended prison confinement. Jonathan's funeral occurred on May 22, 2012, with approximately 700 people who had known and cherished the young man in attendance. They fondly recalled the moments spent with him and cherished him as a cheerful individual who never failed to bring laughter to those around him. As a grandson, Jonathan fell short of his grandmother's expectations, ultimately leading her to conclude that he did not belong in this world. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Don't forget to like and share your opinion in the comments. This is Jeremy. See you in the next video.